Hello everyone. So this is a session in which I'll be discussing with you about a lot of places and sites and locations which have been in news in the last 2 or 3 years. So this is going to be a session which will be relevant for time, as in, on one hand I'm going to bring to your attention all key places and map sites. On the other hand, this session is also going to give you an idea about how you can possibly prepare for this particular topic, right? So I feel the session should serve this dual purpose, because I can probably discuss around 10 to 15 sites which were prominent in the last 2 or 3 years. But if I can teach you the template with which I'll be looking into these sites, I'm sure you can pick up that template, pick up that method, and you'll be able to apply that to many more sites which you would have encountered in your last 2 or 3 years of your awareness to current affairs and your newspaper reading. All right. So it is with this goal in our mind, let's get into the session. First of all, is this topic even important? Yes, it is very much important, a very highly scoreable area, and this is something which many of the serious aspirants will simply get almost all questions right. It's just because they have been reading newspapers. Right. So usually around 6 to 10 marks is asked from these area. Okay. See, there are some questions from international relations which I believe are very difficult to get them right. Right. For example, last year there was a question asked, which of the following is correct about International Toilet Organization? I'm sure most aspirants would not even have heard about that. So those kind of organization based questions from international relations, in my opinion, are very difficult to handle. But these map sites, locations, geography oriented questions of places around the world which were in news, these are areas which are actually very easily doable, right? So that's why those questions from international relations part, they are of two types. One is of organization based. It's only those common organizations which almost all of us would have encountered, like Asian Development Bank, okay, or BRICS Bank. So since these are something that you commonly read about, you can actually get those kind of questions right. But some random organization given, or some body created out of a convention or a protocol, those kind of questions, very difficult to get them right. But if you look at the previous year's questions, almost all the map sites easily doable. All right. So that's why, based on my analysis of previous year's questions, I have segregated all the sites and places that have figured in the news into these categories. Right, I believe all the places can be brought under these categories. So as you can see here on the slide, the first is countries with ongoing civil wars and domestic uprisings. Right. So we have countries like those in Africa where there is always an ongoing civil war, because the country is just fractured between multiple different ethnicities, multiple different racial groups, and hence there is always one or the other faction fighting to overthrow the established government, right? So that's topic number one. And then there are international conflict zones, for example, between two different nations fighting against each other for a disputed territory of land, right? So Russia is like the usual suspect, because wherever Russia has a shared boundary with any of its neighbors, there is always some kind of trouble between the two nations, right? And then there are also other nations which frequently come in news, like Israel, for example, right? Israel has a lot of boundary disputes with all its neighbors, and these are just unresolved, because international border disputes, boundary disputes, they do not really have quick solutions. So what is true 10 years back, what was the same dispute 20 years back, you would find them still repeating, ongoing, right? So then that would be the second theme of our coverage, where we discuss about international conflict zones. Right. And then there are countries which face different types of crisis. Some of them are climate induced, some of them are humanitarian, so some of them are economic crisis, right? So UPSC has a trend of asking such kind of questions. It checks whether you are aware of what actually the problem is in a particular country. So those are another aspects that you will have to be watchful about as well. And then we have this big disruption that's happening around the world because of the presidency of Donald J. Trump. So since he had become the president of US, because of tariff issues, because of migrant issues, because of the belligerent attitude that he had taken towards his neighboring countries. So a lot of states, a lot of nations assume prominence. So that's also something that we'll be discussing as a part of our discussion. And in addition to that, since India's neighborhood is also turbulent these days, like for example, there are a lot of problems going on in Myanmar, Bangladesh, Pakistan, right? So our neighborhood actually assumes equal importance as well. All right. So these are how I would look at the places of prominence, map sites of importance that have to be covered, right? And let me tell you in the beginning itself that the most commonly referred resource for map sites, I'm sure many of you would be referring PT365. I feel it's just totally useless. Just put it aside, because all the ways how I have looked at the different map sites, I just simply want to check whether the magazine also covers that, right? It only covers the superficial, exam irrelevant kind of content. And moreover, when you have 100, 200 pages of content to memorize, what happens is your attention slowly starts getting distracted from the most important aspects. You start focusing on every trivia, as a result of which you are drowned in the noise around and you're not able to get the crux of the issue inside. Whereas when you prepare it on your own, when you start reading articles, when you start extracting ideas out of it, extracting important places and locations, the most important aspects alone are what are made as your notes. So for this particular topic alone, I am more in favor of you making your own notes. I'm sure this session will be helpful in that regard as well, as it can actually help you how to make notes out of this particular content. All right. So this is going to be the agenda of the session, and let's get into that. So what I have before me is the 2024 questions asked from this particular theme in prelims, in civil service examination. So as you can see, there are actually more than 3 questions. I've just kept 3 questions here so as to make it easily visible for all of you. So you can see, so questions are asked like this. 5 questions, 5 countries are given, and the question is, which of the above countries are frequently mentioned in media for their low birth rates or aging population or declining population, right? Where the population is on decline, or where the old population is higher, young people are lower, that's the kind of question that's asked, right? So somebody may point out to you that the answer for this lies in so and so NCERT, but I don't think reading that and remembering them on those data on the day of the exam is going to be even possible. But there are other multiple different ways of how you can remember this. If you'd have read about all the ongoing conflicts in Africa, definitely Ethiopia would not have missed your attention because of the Tigray conflict that's just persisting. And when you read about Ethiopia, you should try to cover it from all aspects possible. And when you try to cover it from all aspects possible, you get to understand Ethiopia is like the second most populous country in Africa. So naturally the question rises, which is the most populous country in Africa? Nothing but Nigeria, right? If it's the most populous country, there is every possibility that the fertility rate is higher, maybe the population growth is higher. No wonder it is the highest, most populous nation in the world, in Africa, right? So using such logic is how you'll be able to eliminate Nigeria from the scene, right? And moreover, you can also say a correlationship between a developing nation and population. The more developed, the more westernized a country is, the number of people choosing to have more than one child actually comes down. So that's the problem with all the Asian tigers. That's the same problem with Japan as well, where people choose to reproduce less. It's because cost of living is very high, and culture as well, they mimic the West. So as a result of which, in South Korea and Japan, people reproduce lower. Okay, so these are the ways how you could have actually got this question right. You should have an option which does not have 3, whereas which has option 4 and 2, right? So eliminate these 2 and you are still left with A and C, and then you work it out around A and C, between A and C, right? So what I'm trying to point out to you is, the answer for this question does not simply come out of memorization. It comes out of exposures. It comes out of exposure. You would not have directly read about Nigeria, but while reading about Ethiopia, you would have read about Nigeria, right? Similarly, all these 3 places could have been easily got right for anybody who was following Hindu newspaper in the last 1 year. All of these were very prominent issues in newspaper. Okay, so that's how this question could have been got right. And look at 2023 question paper. these two questions are simply about conflict zones, and these are very prominent conflict zones. These would never have escaped your attention if simply you were reading newspaper on a daily basis. Okay, all three questions were of the same type. Okay, so that's why I believe this map site is a very, very fertile area. You should simply get 100% strike rate in this particular area, right? Because when it comes to current affairs from economy, or current affairs, or maybe some very difficult question on species from environment, you may not be able to get it right no matter how much ever you prepare. But with very less amount of preparation, just by curiosity, just whenever issues come in the newspaper, you simply go browse, you are able to get all these kind of questions right. Okay, all right. So what I'm trying to tell you is the importance of this particular theme in getting you past your prelims examination. It has a very important role to play, right? 6 to 10 marks every year, easily you can get it. Okay, you read history throughout the year, it's very difficult to get more than 15 marks after reading ancient, medieval, modern, everything, right? But with just normal curiosity, when you read newspaper, easily 6 to 10 marks, right? So this is the smartest work how you can actually crack prelims. All right. And moreover, first you need to understand the difference between a geography class versus a map class for prelims. Okay, in a geography class, you take a particular river, you take river Amazon, you see what are all its different tributaries, right, and where all the different tributaries lie. Okay, or you take the entire map of South America, you start actually knowing each and every country. That's the usual geography class. Okay, but in map class we don't do that, we don't repeat that. And I personally believe for geography optional students, it makes sense to take each and every continent, know each and every country, know each and every country's neighbor and all of that. That's not the kind of study I had ever done for preparing for my map sites for this purpose of the civil service examination. Whereas what I have done is, let's say Guyana is in news, right, and until Guyana was in news, I never even bothered to know where Guyana even existed, right? But the minute I saw Guyana in news, now what I do is I go and explore about Guyana as much as possible. And in the process of exploring about Guyana, now I get to know its neighbors are Venezuela, its neighbors are Brazil, Suriname, right? And Guyana's capital would be Georgetown, and river Amazon does not flow through Guyana, but Guyana lies in the Amazon river basin, right? So this is all the information to the extent required that I'm able to pick up just because Guyana was in news. So I would say that understand this difference in the nature of preparation between a geography class on the same topic whereas a current affairs based map session on the same topic. So only as the need arises, only to the extent required, we tend to get into the geographical aspects of any place that comes in the news. We don't immediately make use of that and start knowing everything about Amazon river. No. Okay, so that is a strategy only to be followed for geography optional students. But for regular general studies students, the preparation method itself is different. And the preparation method is best known when you analyze previous year's questions, right? And it's not like using the same template, using the same lens, you view all places. No, I'll prove it to you. For example, the aspects from which I look at Sudan is actually very different from the aspect with which I look at Ethiopia. Alright, you'll get to know how I do that. So Sudan was in news. Sudan has always been in news in the last 5 years. It's because of the ongoing civil war in which the entire country is divided into two different factions, right? Just to give you a very brief idea about the history of Sudan, Sudan was earlier a colony of the English, and after the Second World War, Sudan got decolonized, and there have been multiple coups in Sudan. Many of the leaders, presidents of Sudan have been assassinated, they have been deposed, overthrown, and one historical president who has been ruling over Sudan for around 30 years is this man, Omar al-Bashir. Right, so he has been ruling Sudan for around 30 years. It's only in the recent years he was overthrown, right, and he was overthrown by his own products. Basically, Omar al-Bashir was able to understand why his past predecessors were weak, why they were easily overthrown. So what he decided was, let me divide the unity of army, right? So he divided the unity of army by recruiting generals, by recruiting leaders from different racial groups, so that each racial group will stand apart from each other. They'll never be able to unite together, right? So that's how he was able to create a sense of rivalry between different racial groups, as a result of which he was able to survive and hold on to power for around 30 years. But finally what happened was, in around 2020, around that time, two of his military generals from two different racial groups, so they both combined together, they came together, they were able to overthrow Omar al-Bashir. And now the problem arises between these two military leaders, right? This much is sufficient, because the history of Sudan is never going to be asked as a prelims question. Just understand, Sudan is in the grip of a civil war. It's because the strong president who had been in power for a long period of time was overthrown by his own two military generals, and these two military generals are now competing with each other so as to capture power. Alright, so that's why it's in news. And one of the group is able to, you can see the Sudan map here, and you can see the red shaded areas and blue shaded areas, right? So the red shaded areas are actually held by one of the military general who right now controls the government of Sudan. So he has control of the Sudanese army itself, right? And this blue color area is actually controlled by the other military general who has his own army paramilitary group, which he calls it as the Rapid Support Forces, right? So RSF versus Sudanese army, this is the ongoing conflict that you would have encountered in the newspaper, right? Now when this news comes, when you look at the map of Sudan, here are certain things that I was able to spot. First thing is, look at the northern boundary of Sudan, the northern border between Egypt and Sudan. It's just a straight line, right? This cannot be a natural boundary. You see the boundary of India, right, with Pakistan, right? It's just so corrugated. It's not so perfectly straight. So, but how do you think the border between Egypt and Sudan can be such a perfect straight line? It's because this is just a straight latitude. A latitude was used as a reference point so as to demarcate the boundary between Egypt and Sudan. And this kind of a question has a very high probability of being asked in prelims, right? For example, look at North Vietnam and South Vietnam. There is a perfect latitude, a 17-degree north latitude, which separates North Vietnam from South Vietnam. Similarly, between North Korea and South Korea, you have the 38-degree north latitude, right? And these have been asked as questions in the previous years. So when you look at previous years questions, you will be able to judge what type of questions can possibly be framed from this particular topic. But this is not the same kind of question which can be expected from Ethiopia, because the borders are so not perfect, right? So here there is no reference latitude or longitude which was actually used to demarcate any boundary, right? So you don't have to look at Ethiopia from the same perspective. But when you read Sudan, just try to understand that it was a 22nd degree north latitude which actually divides Egypt from Sudan. This has a high possibility of being asked as a question, right? So UPSC can give you a match the following question: 17-degree north, 22-degree north, 38-degree north, and the different countries which are divided by these latitudes, and it can test whether you know the right correct options or not. So this is something that I would be focusing when I look into the map of Sudan. All right, and when I look into the map of Sudan, I can actually find that river Nile runs through Sudan, right? And actually speaking, Sudan is the easternmost part of the Saharan desert area, right? So this river Nile, you can see here, this is river Nile. This river Nile that passes through Sudan divides the Saharan area into two parts. This left part is what is called as Libyan desert, right part is what is called as the Nubian desert, right? Both are parts of Sahara. Okay, so Nubian desert lies on the northeast part of Sudan. It also lies on Eritrea. Okay, whereas Libyan desert lies, as the name indicates, in Libya, in Sudan, as well as in Chad, right? So if possible, try to remember the different boundary nations of Sudan, right? I wouldn't say it's very compulsory. UPSC, I don't think it actually asks all the boundary nations. It may ask, for example, last year I think there was a question asked about the bordering nations of Ukraine, okay, or I think Black Sea, some kind of a question was asked. But I believe you cannot really go and mug up the bordering nations of every such country which was in news. But when you keep on looking at the map, you can definitely remember that Sudan, on one side you have Chad, other side you have Eritrea, on the north you have Egypt, and south you have South Sudan, right? At least to this extent, if you can remember, when they give you a random country like Cameroon, you will be able to eliminate Cameroon from the option. To the extent of elimination, frequent exposures and re-exposures to places in news can do you some help, right? I wouldn't be the person to actually recommend you to start memorizing Chad, Egypt, Eritrea, Ethiopia, South Sudan, and I don't know what country lies here, probably Democratic Republic of Central African Republic. Alright, I wouldn't be the type of person to go ask you to mug up and memorize all these places, because I have never done that. Alright, to the extent possible, keep on revisiting this map site. Alright, now when I further look into the map of Sudan, I'm able to notice certain other aspects as well. I'm able to notice that Blue Nile and White Nile, both the river streams they meet at Khartoum. Khartoum is the capital of Sudan, right? And the river Nile progresses further northward, goes to Egypt, and finally drains into the Mediterranean Sea, right? So this is what I'm able to actually figure out from the map, right? And I'm also able to understand Blue Nile has its origin from Lake Tana. And where is Lake Tana located? Lake Tana is located in Ethiopia. So what I'm trying to point out to you is, I wouldn't take up a list of lakes of Africa. There could be 50-60 lakes and start mugging up each and every lake. No, only to the extent required. Since I study about Sudan, since I'm able to understand its river Nile, which forms the lifeline of Sudan itself, I'm now more curious to know about river Nile, right? While knowing about river Nile, I come to encounter that Nile is formed as a confluence of two different tributaries, basically Blue Nile, which originates in Lake Tana, which is actually located in Ethiopia, right? An interesting fact. And then White Nile, which is even longer than Blue Nile, which actually originates further southward. It actually originates from Lake Victoria. And now I look further deep into this map to understand where Lake Victoria lies. Okay, it lies, Lake Victoria lies in Uganda, it lies in Kenya, as well as it lies in Tanzania. This is the way I come to understand, oh, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda are on the eastern part of Africa, right? And Lake Victoria has bordering regions around Uganda, Kenya, as well as Tanzania. That's all. This much is enough for me, right? I started my search just by knowing where was Sudan. If you would have been very superficial alone, you would have simply mugged up that Sudan is a coastal state. Sudan is not a landlocked country. Probably that aspect you would have mugged up. You would have known that it's a littoral state of Red Sea. Fine, I'll give it to you. You can probably also try to remember all the different neighboring countries. But if you are experienced by looking at previous year's questions, as soon as you see a straight line here, you'll be able to identify that it should be a latitude. What latitude? Perfectly 22nd degree north. Now when you look at the map of Sudan, you're able to understand why is this place white, this place white. Why have no rebel forces bothered to capture these places? Probably because they are desert regions. Nobody even lives there, right? That's when I came to know about Libyan desert and Nubian desert, not because I already knew it. I just asked this question as to why was there no capture of these places? Because it's sparse, because it's not human inhabited. And then I start understanding, oh, it's a part of the Libyan desert, this is a part of Nubian desert. More learning. Alright, now I care to learn about Nile, and another interesting aspect that I learn about Nile is that the longest course that Nile has in any particular country is in Sudan. It's in Sudan that the longest course of Nile exists, because we usually tend to associate Nile River with Egypt, right? But Egypt, yes, Nile River only has a short course, but it's only in Sudan actually it has a longer course, right? So this is also another important aspect that you can actually try to understand. Okay, pictorially you can try to grasp all these kind of different aspects. Okay, so UPSC can ask you questions like this. It can give you all the conflict zones in one hand and the countries in which they are located. And a conflict zone that can be given would be Darfur, right? Where is Darfur located? Okay, is it correctly matched? And the option that is matched could be Ethiopia. you may make a blind assumption that okay, it could be true, right? But that's not the case. You see, Darfur is located in the western part of Sudan, right? So Darfur is under the control of Rapid Support Forces. All right. So these are the different ways how you look into this particular issue of Sudan civil war. The historical aspect involving who has overthrown whom, who is now in control of the Sudanese army, not important. But an exposure to this news is an opportunity to gather more ideas about this particular geography, right? So you can understand that Sudan actually is a littoral state. It shares its boundary with Red Sea, right? And Sudan is where the longest course of river Nile runs. And another important aspect is Sudan is the largest producer of a particular agricultural commodity called as gum arabic, right? What is this gum arabic? I'm sure a lot of us would have seen on the tree barks, right? You have a brown color liquid oozing out of the tree barks, which over time becomes a hard gum, right? So similarly, in the acacia tree which grows in Sudan, in savanna like conditions where acacia grows, and savanna type of climate is also called as the Sudan type of climate, right? So it's in Sudan where you have large number of acacia trees, and on its bark you have those gummy substance, right? It's called gum arabic. Okay, and gum arabic, Sudan is the largest producer of gum arabic in the whole world. Okay, so that's a matter of prominence. Whereas for Ethiopia, there is no such thing called as Ethiopia being the largest producer of any particular commodity. Of course, coffee is widely grown in Ethiopia, but even in that case, Ethiopia is not the largest producer of coffee in the world. So that's why when you don't have the largest producer, you don't really have to be worried about it. Okay, so this is also another aspect that I was able to pick up from my understanding of Sudan and its geography. All right. So we move on to the next country, which is basically Ethiopia, right? So Ethiopia is in news. It has been in news because of its civil war, and you should understand, Ethiopia is a region around which Homo sapiens, all different species of human beings, we all evolved in and around Ethiopia, right? And no wonder why Ethiopia has so much of genetic diversity. Look at the type of people, type of population that you actually find in Ethiopia, right? Africa itself is a cradle of human evolution. The highest amount of genetic diversity is possible in Africa, right? One or two streams of that genetic diversity is what you find in India, but it's in Africa. That's also the same reason why we have people belonging to different races, people belonging to different ethnic groups, people speaking different languages. They all are clustered in certain homogeneous groups, right? As a result of which, over time, and history has been very, very problematic, right? Human history is always a history of conflict. So different racial groups fighting it out with each other. Some imagined hurt and grievances is how two communities would engage with each other. 300 years back, somebody from one tribal group could have assassinated somebody else from the different tribal group. So that baggage continues till the present day, right? And when you have so much of diversity, and when you have limited resources for which all of these groups are competing with each other, definitely clashes, conflict is very much possible. And that clashes, conflict is what spills over into the 21st century as well, right? So you see the type of genetic diversity that you find in Ethiopia. So these are all the different ethnic groups that you have in Ethiopia, right? Oromo, Amhara, Somali, Tigray, Sidam, Guragi. These are all the names of different racial ethnic groups. All right. So if you see this, among these people, this particular person, right, they are who can be called as the Tigrayans. Okay, and who are these people? These Tigray people are slightly different in the sense you will find them, they are the ones among the group of Ethiopians with a more fair complexion, wheatish kind of a complexion. And the reason for that is they are Semitic people, Semitic Ethiopians, which means that there are many Jews in the Tigray population, and many of them, they have descent which can be traced to the Arabs from the Levant, right? So that's why they are called as the Semitic people. Okay, so as a result of which the element of exclusivity is higher perceived by the Tigray people. They feel that they are different. They feel that they are being dominated by the majority Oromo group of people, right? And so no wonder the Tigrayans, they want to have autonomy. They want to have a separate homeland for themselves. So that's why the Tigray belt, the Tigray region, is where civil war keeps on ongoing. All right. So Ethiopia is in news. So when I read more about Ethiopia, what I'm able to understand is Ethiopia has a peculiar problem to that. It's the second most populous nation in entire Africa. And if you take the top 30 most populous nations of the world, Ethiopia would also figure in that. But the only problem of Ethiopia is among the top 30 most populous nations, all other 29 nations have access to sea, whereas Ethiopia does not. And the second most populous nation of Africa, but which lacks access to sea, right? So it always makes Ethiopia insecure, right? At any point of time, its resources, its survival can be questioned. Just one naval blockade and all essential commodities can be prevented from reaching Ethiopia, right? So that is also another reason why recently Ethiopia seems to be taking a hostile position with respect to its neighbors, particularly with respect to Eritrea, right? And the president of Ethiopia expects that his country will have a direct access to sea. The reason was because Eritrea was earlier a part of Ethiopia, but then because of civil war, Ethiopia got bifurcated and Eritrea became a separate nation, as a result of which the coastline was deprived for Ethiopia. So today Ethiopia is completely dependent upon the small tiny country called as Djibouti, right? So the entire export of Ethiopia goes through Djibouti. It reaches this narrow strait which is called as the Bab al-Mandab. Bab al-Mandab Strait is a choke point just 20 miles wide, and you name any major navy, US, Germany, France, England, China, all of them have their naval bases here so as to ensure smooth passage of traffic here. And this is where you have Yemen, and the Yemen Houthi tribes, right? The Houthis, who are backed by Iran, they are actually a big nuisance for the smooth passage of naval traffic through this Bab al-Mandab Strait, right? And US has even launched recent operations against the Houthis of Yemen. I'm sure you would be aware of Houthis of Yemen, right? So what I'm trying to say is Ethiopia, being a second most populous nation of Africa, is still landlocked. Okay, so tomorrow UPSC can ask you a question. It can give you a series of it can give you various countries: Eritrea, Somalia, Ethiopia, Djibouti, right? And it can actually ask you which of the following countries lie on the coast of Red Sea, and you may assume, yeah, everything is lying on the east, and you may go for all of the four as right option. But understand, Ethiopia is landlocked. It does not have direct access to sea. All right. Yeah, so I have already told you about Lake Tana. Okay, so Lake Tana, you can see here. Okay, Lake Tana is where the Blue Nile actually originates. Okay, so Lake Tana lies in Ethiopia. All right, so apart from that, there isn't anything more to discuss about Ethiopia. Okay, and yeah, so among the entire East African nations, the country with the highest GDP would be Ethiopia. Among the entire East African nations, if you actually add the entire population of all its neighbors, it would still be lesser than that of Ethiopia. All right. So Ethiopia is very significant that way. In the entire East African countries, Ethiopia is very important. Many times, if you live somewhere close to airport, okay, you can always find among the African country aeroplanes which reaches the airport, you'll always find Ethiopian Airlines. Okay, I have never seen Sudan Airlines or Eritrean Airlines, but Ethiopian Airlines, yes, flights frequently visit Chennai as well as Delhi. So which shows that there is a lot of activity, economic activity going on. There's a lot of business going on, which brings Indian businessmen to Ethiopia. And a lot of Ethiopian students also enroll in different colleges here in India, right? So considering the economic clout that Ethiopia once had, and even now it has, that's why the headquarters of African Union is basically located in Ethiopia. Not without any purpose was the headquarters of African Union situated in Ethiopia, because of the clout it carries among the eastern African nations. Right. So that's something that you can actually remember. And now you know broadly what would be the bordering nations of Ethiopia. Right. Towards the coast we have Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, and to the north of Ethiopia we will be having Sudan. Right. Since we have Sudan there, to the south of Sudan we have the South Sudan, which can also be another boundary nation of Ethiopia. Right. So that's how you tend to associate all its different bordering nations, not by memorization. Okay. So we'll move on. Another African country that has been very prominently in news would be Rwanda. Even a few days back as well, Rwanda was in news. It's because of I think an interview given by the president of Rwanda. His name is Paul Kagame. Right. If you would have watched this movie Hotel Rwanda, it's a very popular English movie. If you would have watched this movie, it clearly portrays the conflict between two different racial groups within Rwanda. Right. The conflict was between Hutus versus Tutsis, and this conflict was actually called as the African World War. Why? 8 lakh people, 8 lakh Africans were actually killed in this conflict. Majority of them were Tutsis. Right. So as I told you, again, a lot of genetic diversity, racial diversity, and the Tutsis have always been on the higher side of economic clout. They have been good businessmen. So it's always just like Sinhala Tamil conflict. Right. Whenever you find an element of ethnic conflict, there is always a point of relative deprivation between the two communities, or at least an imagined sense of deprivation in the minds of at least one of the community, and that is exactly what Hutus had. They felt their opportunities, their economic livelihood, it's all stolen by the Tutsis. Right. And Hutus being the majority, automatically the Tutsis they've started being attacked. Genocide, rape, murder, all of that was directed against the Tutsis. Right. So this was the history of the violent nature of Hutu-Tutsi conflict in Rwanda. Okay. And at the end of this conflict, it was the Tutsis who were victorious, because they were helped by Uganda, which was a neighbor of Rwanda. And not only that, it was helped by a coalition of different African countries, right, who were all sympathetic to the cause of Tutsis, because they were targeted, they were ethnically wiped out, cleansed. They have a lighter complexion than the Hutus. Alright, and this man Paul Kagame is a Tutsi. So he emerged as a strong military leader during the conflict Rwandan civil war. And since then, Paul Kagame had been continuing as the president of Rwanda. Right. So it is this Paul Kagame who actually supports a civil war that's actually going on in Congo. You see this country, Congo, democratic. There are two Congo. One is simply Congo. What we are referring to here is the bigger country, which is called as the Democratic Republic of Congo. Right. So when this Rwandan civil war happened, finally the Tutsis were able to win. Right. And a lot of Hutus, the Hutus who feared a Tutsi backlash, who feared that the Tutsis might seek revenge over them, a lot of these Hutus, they actually escaped away from Rwanda. Just look at the map of Rwanda. Rwanda is not even 10% of the size of that of Democratic Republic of Congo. Rwanda is such a small country here, with its capital at Kigali. Right, Kigali is the capital of Rwanda. Such a small country, and the Hutus who feared a backlash, they all entered into Democratic Republic of Congo. Right, but here in Democratic Republic of Congo, let's call it as DRC. In DRC, we also have the Tutsi minorities, the ethnic minorities who were living here. And since these Hutus were supported by the DRC, the Tutsi minorities were supported by Rwanda. It's very natural. So one particular group, a military armed group, which has received all the weapons and training from Rwandan army. Alright, so Rwanda actually supports this armed uprising of the Tutsis inside DRC, and this group is called as the M23 group, comprising of Tutsis basically. And why is it called as M23? It's called as the March 23, 2012 group, because on this day there was a a talk that was held so as to assimilate these Tutsis into the DRC army, and since the talks failed, as a result of which on the day of March 23rd, this particular paramilitary group comprising of the Tutsis was formed so as to win a Tutsi homeland within DRC, right? So that's why it's called as the M23 rebel group, right? And now this M23 rebel group is actively supported by this president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame. So he's been actively supporting with arms, training and ammunitions and all of that, right? So what is important for us here is this M23 group, which operates just like how the rapid support forces inside Sudan operate. This is a rebel group within Rwanda, within DRC, and look at the site that they have captured. They have captured two important sites, North Kivu, South Kivu, right? So these are provinces which actually border Rwanda. Okay, so this Kivu is basically a part of DRC which has been brought under the occupation of the M23 rebels. So why am I insisting on that? Just look at the previous year's question. You will find here a question here. Consider the following pairs: North Kivu and Ituri. Reason for being in news: war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Right? You don't have to know about Ituri. If you have only known about North Kivu, you could have actually eliminated this question. It's not between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It's between DRC and it's between Rwanda. Right? So this is how UPSC asks. It may scare you. It may scare you by asking you a question like North Kivu and Ituri. It may try to unsettle you. But if you have only paid attention to this issue which has been ongoing. So the heading of the topic itself is we cover all the sites between 2022 to 2025, because a lot of these sites have a historical basis to it. Right? So Ethiopia, Tigray issue may not be a flashpoint today, but there is always a potential for Tigray region to also be asked as a question. Right? So that's why we stretch our extent of learning starting from 2022 onwards. That was a question. In this question, it's actually asked in 2023 prelims. Right? So you could have got this question easily right. North Kivu was between Rwanda and DRC, if you would have known about this. Alright, and it's not so difficult to know about this as well because of multiple reasons. One is this lake that you have between Rwanda and between DRC, right? This lake is what is called as Lake Kivu. The name of the lake itself is Lake Kivu, right? And on the north of Lake Kivu you have the territory called as North Kivu, and the south of it you have the South Kivu, right? Or this year UPSC can ask you a question like this: the place Goma has been in news. Why was it in news? Right? You should understand Goma is M23's main area of operations in 2024 to 2025, which means the area Goma was a recent capture by the M23 rebel forces. And where is Goma located? Goma is located in Democratic Republic of Congo. Alright. So, and what about Lake Kivu? Is it an endorheic lake? Because when you look at it, it looks like as if there is no drainage to it. There is no outlet to it. It feels, when you look at the image, as if all streams come and they form a lake and then there is no exit for that. But that's not the case. This is Lake Kivu, this is Lake Edward. Right? Both these lakes, they are located on a rift valley. Okay. So as a result of which you have fractures here, as a result of which this particular Lake Kivu is drained into Lake I think Tanganyika, okay, by a particular river. Okay, we don't have to go to that extent. So just understand that the Lake Kivu, it looks as if it's an endorheic lake, as if there is no outlet for that, but that's not the case. Picture does not capture the fracture zone, but there is a fracture zone, as a result of which there is an outlet to the water. It goes and mixes with Lake Tanganyika. Alright. Similarly, Lake Edward as well, this is also not an endorheic lake. The name is endorheic, which means that streams come, they converge at the lake, and then there is no outlet for the lake. But both Lake Kivu as well as Lake Edward, both of them are not endorheic lakes. Okay, so you can just understand that there is an ongoing conflict between DRC and between Rwanda, right? The capital of Rwanda would be Kigali, okay, and the capital of Democratic Republic of Congo would be Kinshasa. Another important aspect to notice here is we always associate Democratic Republic of Congo to be in the center of Africa, right? It's our imagination. As soon as we read about DRC, oh, we assume that it's an equatorial rainforest probably located in the center, right? Also understand that DRC is not a landlocked country. You see, there's a very narrow strip of land which actually connects it to the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, there are very few landlocked countries in Africa. Okay, so you can see here Uganda is one among the landlocked country. Okay, and Burundi, Rwanda, these are two small landlocked countries. Okay, so Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, these are landlocked countries that we have seen until now, right? And maybe Chad, which we have seen earlier. Chad could also be a landlocked country, and we have already seen Ethiopia as another landlocked country, right? So these are all how you will be able to eliminate some of the options when a question is given in your exam, not by simply memorizing what are all the different landlocked countries, what are all littoral states. You don't have to memorize or mug up like that. As you encounter, as you get more and more exposed. So this is one video that you watch on places and sites of importance. Maybe if you watch 2 or 3 more videos in the upcoming months, you will once again your attention will fall upon all these countries, right? Even from those videos you will be able to gather more aspects about which are landlocked, which are not landlocked countries, right? So as of now, just try to understand that Democratic Republic of Congo has access to Atlantic Ocean, and DRC shares its border with Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania. It's a little complex because there are it's such a big country and you have so many different other states nearby, right? To the extent possible, because of this issue, we clearly know Rwanda is a bordering nation of that of DRC, right? And this will definitely be one of the options in the countries given by UPSC. Okay, and if Sudan is given, you will be able to eliminate. Sudan cannot be this southward. Sudan has to be somewhere in the north, right? So these are the ways of how we look into this particular issue. What is important when it comes to this Rwanda versus DRC issue is who are Hutus, who are Tutsis, right? These are tribal groups who are populations both in DRC as well as in Rwanda, where in Rwanda a civil war had already broken out between these two groups, right? Lake Kivu is important. Goma is the most important aspect of this particular news now, because among the North Kivu, South Kivu regions, the most important town that was located it is Goma. It's a big city, and it is this big city of Goma which has now fallen into the hands of the rebels, right? UPSC's question can be of very easy type also. UPSC can simply ask, Goma has been in news because of the capture by rebel forces in Democratic Republic of Congo. Which group of rebels have actually captured Goma? 4 or 5 rebel groups can be given. M23, just go for it as the right answer, right? Or Goma has been in news. Where is Goma located? Or Goma can be one of the places among the 3 or 4 places given as a match the following option. Multiple ways of how UPSC can play around with this particular issue, all right? Or capitals. Rwanda, Kigali, DRC, Kinshasa, Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, right? So you should not assume that okay, UPSC is testing my memory. No, it is testing your awareness and your attempts at re-exposing yourself to what you were aware of. Okay, all right. Okay. So now we'll look into international conflicts. Okay, so as of now, all the 3 countries that we have looked into were issues of civil war that were going on. Now let's have a look at international conflicts, that is disputes between 2 different countries. See, even in the Rwanda issue that I was telling you, Rwanda is not openly at a state of war with DRC. Rwanda clandestinely supports the M23 rebel groups. And even this President Paul Kagame, in a recent interview to BBC, there was an interview in which he was openly asked by the interviewer. The host was asking him a direct question to his face: are you supporting the rebel groups M23? And Paul Kagame says, I don't know. right? And the interviewer even asks, you are the commander-in-chief of your army, how can you say I don't know? And he says, there are so many things that happen without my knowledge, so I don't know, right? Imagine a president of a nation giving such an answer, right? So what it means is, the president outwardly, he denies involvement of his country directly in a state of war against DRC. That's why these are all issues of civil war. But what we'll now have a look at is areas, it's basically international conflicts between different nations, right? So let's start with the first nation in South America, which is basically the ongoing conflict between Venezuela and Guyana, right? So what is this issue actually all about? It is historical. Venezuela was actually a colony of Spain, and Guyana was a colony of Britain. All right. So you will find a lot of Indians who would be the predominant population of Guyana, because Britishers used to bring a lot of Indians and employ them in sugarcane fields, plantations and all of that. Okay, you have a lot of Indians in Guyana, number one. So what is this conflict between Venezuela and Guyana actually all about? It is, after all, for this particular region. First of all, you should understand this is Guyana. Let me just draw it out for you. Right, this part is what is Guyana, and out of that, 3/4 of this part is under conflict. It is under dispute because Venezuela claims that this particular territory belongs to Venezuela. And what is the name of this particular territory? This territory is what is called as the Essequiba region. Right, you should be making a note of this. Essequiba region is basically a conflict territory, a dispute territory, which is located in Guyana, which is actually 3/4 of Guyana itself, right? And why is Venezuela staking a claim to this? Because it says that it does not accept British government's unilateral decision to claim to hand over Essequiba to Guyana, right? Venezuela simply says, I was not a party to this decision. Okay, and Essequiba region is very rich in gold, right, and oil reserves as well. And not only that, Guyana in the last few years, in the last 4 or 5 years, has become one of the richest country in the entire Americas. I'm not only talking about South America, the entire Americas, which includes both North America and South America. After US, after Canada, now the country with the highest GDP per capita, right, you will find it's Guyana. Guyana just rose to prominence from one of the poorest countries of Americas to now one of the richest countries of Americas. Can you believe a country whose GDP has been rising at a rate of 60% year on year? That would be Guyana. The simple reason being, a lot of oil reserves have been found on the coast of Guyana. And this has been found while the Venezuela's oil reserves have been dipping down. And Venezuela is an oil dependent economy. Its entire resources comes because of its oil reserves. All right, and Venezuela has been facing a series of economic crisis because of a lot of sanctions imposed by USA on Venezuela, because of the disputes in power transfer that happened post elections in Venezuela, where the strong man of Venezuela, his name is Nicolas Maduro, right? So he held on to power. Okay, so as a result of which Venezuela was subjected to sanctions. So the sanctions were very, very crippling to the Venezuelan economy, and already the Venezuelan economy dependent on oil, it's not having a good time. So that's why, since its reserves of oil in Venezuela is also dipping, now Venezuela feels if only it can have access, it can have the ownership of Essequiba region. From here it can control the economic exclusive zone up to 200 nautical miles, right? And it is here where you have all the newly discovered oil fields of Guyana, right? If only this region, the Essequiba region, can be handed over to Venezuela, Venezuela can also stake its ownership over some of the oil fields which will be located within the exclusive economic zone of Venezuela now, right? So that is why the Essequiba region is in news. This can be asked as a question, number one. And second, this line that divides Venezuela from Guyana, right? This line is what is called as the Schomburg line. Okay, also remember this. Okay, we have blue line which separates Israel from Lebanon. I'm sure you will be aware of that. It's in current affairs. Similarly, another line that separates Venezuela from Guyana would be this Schomburg line, which is also equally important to be remembered. Okay, so these are the multiple reasons why Venezuela and Guyana assumes prominence. One is because of the dispute over the Escobar region, and Guyana has emerged as one of the leading producers of crude oil in the world. Okay, and the potential such that Guyana can tomorrow become similar to the Gulf nations. It can become the next UAE, or it can become the next Qatar. The same quality of life which these countries have, next, that is going to be guaranteed for Guyana, right? And no wonder it actually is an irritation for Venezuela. Okay, a lot of Venezuelans have already started leaving Venezuela. They trek through the dangerous Darien Gap. You have a gap here between Colombia and Panama. Okay, it's such a treacherous route. It's very, very risky to go through that route. Okay, so a lot of Venezuelans, they risk their life, go through the Darien Gap, okay, and illegally they enter into USA. A lot of illegal migrants in USA are actually Venezuelans. And why are they leaving Venezuela? Because the quality of life is so bad in Venezuela, while at the same time the quality of life is improving in Guyana. Okay, so what is to be also noted here is the capital of Guyana, which is actually called as Georgetown. So Georgetown is the capital of Guyana. All right, so you can see this blue river that's running, right? So that's basically river Amazon. So you will find river Amazon starting from Peru. This is Peru here. It starts from Peru, enters into Colombia, then traverses all the way through Brazil and enters into Atlantic, right? So answering the question, does Amazon go through Guyana? No, it's not the case. Amazon only traverses through 3 countries. One is Peru, other one is Colombia, other one is Brazil, right? It goes and it meets, it drains in Atlantic Ocean. But if there is a question in UPSC prelims too this year, and the question says, Guyana, is it located in Amazon River Basin? Yes, it is, because the main Amazon River may not go through Guyana, but there are just so many different streams which are all the different tributaries of Amazon, right, which actually drains different parts of South America. As a result of which, some of the tributaries which starts from Guyana, they go and join with river Amazon. So that's why even Guyana is located in the Amazon River Basin, though it's not directly on the pathway of the main course of river Nile itself. All right, so just remember this particular issue, this particular point. Okay, and there are other ways of looking at the same issue. How else can you look at it? You can start wondering, what are the major capitals of different South American nations which are located on the Atlantic coast? Because Georgetown is located on the Atlantic coast, right? Are there any other capitals of other South American countries which are located on the Atlantic coast? This is how you take cues, you take an inspiration from one aspect, then you start applying it to all different other countries as well, right? When you look at it, the only other country whose capital is located on the Atlantic Ocean coastline would be Uruguay, right? Uruguay, with its capital called as Montevideo, is the only other country which has a capital city located on the coast of Atlantic Ocean, right? Let me show you a map here. You see here, Argentina has a capital, Buenos Aires. Okay, but Buenos Aires is not a coastal city, whereas Uruguay has its capital here, which is actually on the coast of Atlantic Ocean. And this is Brazil. Brazil has its capital in Brasilia, which is far inland. Okay, so Guyana has its capital at Georgetown. Venezuela has its capital as Caracas, but Caracas is also not located on the coast. It's slightly 150 kilometers interior. All right, so this is another aspect of how you can actually look at the different capitals. Another opportunity to get yourself familiarized with the different capitals of different South American nations, and also which are the capital cities which lie on the Atlantic coast as well. All right. So let's look at the next conflict issue. The next conflict issue is between Ukraine and Russia. So now let's turn our attention towards other zone of international conflict which is still persisting for the last 3 or 4 years, which is basically the conflict that's going on between Ukraine and Russia. Alright, and every year in the last 2 years prelims, there has been one or other question, at least one question asked about different aspects of this Ukraine and Russia geography. I think one year the question was about what type of soil is suitable for sunflower cultivation, because Ukraine is the largest producer of sunflower oil. So I think that was the nature of question. You see, a question linked out of agriculture, right, linked with agriculture, but on a certain part that is prominently in news, right. Last year there was a question asked about which are all the bordering countries of Black Sea, okay, or if my memory is wrong, it could then be about the bordering nations of Ukraine. So either of the two question was actually asked. All right, so that's why this particular landmass, right, it's important. So we need to actually understand the geography of this area. All right, so what kind of questions do I actually expect in the future? There could be questions asked about the different seas that actually lie in this region, right. There are 5 different seas that actually lie in this region, starting from Mediterranean Sea, and all the 5 seas are connected. Then you have the Aegean Sea, then you have the Sea of Marmara here, and then you have Black Sea, followed by Sea of Azov, right. All the seas are connected to each other with the help of by means of small straits. All right, so what are the straits? The strait that actually connects Sea of Azov with Black Sea, right. You have a small opening here which is called as the Kerch Strait. Alright, Kerch Strait is important because the Russians have recently managed to build a bridge connecting these two landmasses, because on this side you have Russia, right, and here you have Crimea, and Crimea had already been annexed by Russia. I think a decade back, Crimea, this peninsula, was already annexed by Russia from Ukraine. Alright, so since then what Ukraine had done was that Ukraine had stopped the flow of fresh water into Crimea, as a result of which the Crimean Peninsula is now not possible for human habitation without freshwater supplies. That's why Russians have built a bridge through which they had built pipes, and they have been transporting fresh water to Crimea. Okay, so the bridge was actually built over the Kerch Strait. So this can be actually asked as a question. Kerch Strait connects what two water bodies? It connects Sea of Azov with the Black Sea. This can be a question. And then slightly coming down to the south, you will find the Bosphorus Strait, which actually connects Sea of Marmara with Black Sea. So this is Black Sea and this is Sea of Marmara. That is connected with the help of Strait of Bosphorus. Alright, coming even further south, you will find the Aegean Sea here, which is connected to the Sea of Marmara by Dardanelles, Strait of Dardanelles. Alright, so this is how the geography of this particular region actually is. So you need to actually understand the different water bodies that are actually connected through all these straits. Alright, and not only that, you should also have a decent idea about the different rivers that actually drain into all these seas, if at all they do so. Right, and just think about it, the most important river of Europe would be river Danube and river Dnieper. Right, these are some of the important rivers of Eastern Europe, and these rivers would actually, look at this, river Danube would actually drain into Black Sea, and river Dnieper, which actually passes through Ukraine, will be draining into Black Sea. Right, so neither Danube nor Dnieper would drain into Sea of Azov. It rather, both of these important Eastern European rivers would actually drain into Black Sea. At least to this extent you should have an idea, right? And if that is the case, then what rivers would actually drain into Sea of Azov? The rivers that actually drain into Sea of Azov are both Russian. One is river Don, the other one is river Kuban. Right, if you actually ask me where does Don originate from, where does Kuban originate from, I really have no idea. It originates from some part of interior Russia. Who knows, they may even have their origin in some foreign countries. It could be Georgia, it could be Azerbaijan. I have no idea about it, and I don't think it's necessary you need to go and trace the river routes, right? But at least since this area is in news, we need to understand River Don, River Kuban, they both drain into Sea of Azov. If possible, try to remember. Even if you do not remember what drains into Sea of Azov, at least remember River Dnieper, which is the most important river of Ukraine, that does not drain into Sea of Azov. It rather drains into Black Sea. This is something to be remembered. Alright. And another aspect that has to be remembered here is all the conflict zones. Right, because the Russians make an advance, they capture some parts of Ukraine, and then Ukrainians push the Russians backward. Finally, the new boundaries of the areas captured, it settles around certain regions. Right, this was actually asked as a question last year. I'll show you the question here. You see, Kherson and Zaporizhia, where is it located? Dispute between Israel and Lebanon. Which is wrong. Okay, and Nagorno-Karabakh is basically a dispute between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So that should have been here. So all three options are incorrectly matched. Right? So Kherson, Zaporizhia, this is basically a disputed territory between Russia and Ukraine. So you can see this map here. The map here captures all the conquered places of Ukraine, which is now in the hands of Russia. These were earlier parts of Ukraine, but now it's in the hands of Russia. Right? So Luhansk, Donetsk, Mariupol, Melitopol, if at all you encounter these areas, you should know that these are to be remembered in the context of Ukraine-Russia conflict. Okay, who knows, UPSC can even ask questions where the question might be of this nature. The following territories have earlier been in the control of Russians and now it has been liberated by the Ukrainian forces. Which of the following are they? And they can give an option Kharkiv. Right, Kharkiv is to the northern part of Ukraine. You see, the Russians did not like Ukraine expressing inclination to join with NATO, and that's the reason why the Russians had attacked Ukraine from all directions, because Belarus is almost like a satellite state of Russia. So Russians, they anyway had army stationed in Belarus. So from the north, Russian army advanced into Ukraine. From the east, Russian army advanced into Ukraine. And not only that, while the Russian army advanced into Ukraine, they even helped foment civil war in the eastern parts. So Luhansk People's Republic, Donetsk People's Republic, so such kinds of breakaway regions were all engineered by the Russians. So Russians were able to enter Ukraine from the north, from the east, and their fleet that was stationed in the Black Sea made the southward entry into Ukraine. Right? So when the Russians made an entry from the north, this Kharkiv region was actually, it had fallen under the control of Russians. But then with the help of Americans, after Americans had started sending their tanks, they had their famous tanks called as the Abrams tanks. Right, just like how we have the Arjuna tank, Russians have the T series tanks. Similarly, the best tanks of the US are the Abrams tanks. So Abrams tanks were sent, as a result of which the Russian advance was stopped, Kharkiv was liberated. Alright, but these zones, they are not yet liberated. They are still under Russian occupation. Right, so Luhansk, Donetsk, Mariupol, Melitopol, these are some important areas. You see, Zaporizhia was earlier under the control of Russians, but now that has been a liberated zone. But when the question was asked in 2023, it's been 2 years by now. When the question was asked in 23, Zaporizhia was also, including Kharkiv, all these areas were under the control of Russians. No wonder it was asked, and Zaporizhia is where Ukraine's nuclear power plant actually exists. So it was actually news that at any time Russian weapons, missile can probably, it can fall upon the nuclear plant, and a nuclear holocaust, a meltdown can even happen. So Zaporizhia was in news. Right, so just watch out for Luhansk and Donetsk, because separate people's republics have been established here because of Russian support. Has a potential of being asked as a question. And since we are discussing about Russia, it's also prudential we discuss about the other neighbors of Russia where Russia has an ongoing border dispute, and that would be Georgia. Right, look at the map. Georgia is here. Right, Georgia also is a littoral state of Black Sea. Right, see, Georgia, Ukraine, Belarus, all of these were breakaway regions of the United Soviet Russia, and that's why the Russians always, they have border disputes with all their breakaway cousins. Right, so with Georgia, two regions are very important. One is South Ossetia, the other one is Abkhazia, right? South Ossetia, Abkhazia, these are the two regions that are important from the perspective of Russia versus Georgia conflict. All right. So I think if you can just remember these many areas here, I think these are sufficient enough. There can be small islands everywhere, but you don't have to go and remember all those small tiny islands. Just remember the larger issues here. Larger issues are the major river systems, right? So do not be confused. I hope that Dnieper can be matched with Black Sea. If that's the case, it's the right option. Or if UPSC confuses you by matching Dnieper with Mediterranean, right, you should actually understand that there is no way that river flowing in Ukraine can actually be linked with Mediterranean, right? There is a Black Sea in between, then there is an Aegean Sea in between. So you should have that spatial orientation in your mind, your memory. All right. So when it comes to Ukraine-Russia conflict, all these yet to be liberated places, plus all the river systems that drains into Black Sea, and also try to remember all the bordering nations of Black Sea. When it comes to Sea of Azov, right, when it comes to Sea of Azov, it's just the territory of Ukraine and Russia. There is no other country that is a littoral state of Sea of Azov. But when it comes to Black Sea, there are just so many different countries, right? Starting, Greece is not one among the country. Just remember this. Greece is not a littoral state of Black Sea. It starts with Bulgaria, right? Bulgaria, Turkey, Georgia, Russia, Ukraine, and then Romania. All right. So these are the different countries that are the littoral states around Black Sea. So Bulgaria, Romania, this is all Ukraine, and then you have Russia, and then you have Georgia and Turkey. These are the different countries. All right. So the next conflict zone would be Israel. Okay. So the conflict still goes on, and what is important when it comes to Israel is you need to know what are the different bordering nations of Israel, right? You have Lebanon, and you have Syria, Jordan, Egypt, right? So these are the different bordering nations of Israel. And what is even more important are the different crossings that you have. You have the Rafah crossing between Egypt and between Gaza, right? So just get to know this crossings. I think Rafah crossing was already asked 1 year in previous year's question, which brings us to the other crossings in Israel, which is called as the Sheikh Hussein crossing, which is between Israel and Jordan. So between Israel and Jordan you have Sheikh Hussein crossing. Between West Bank and Jordan you have the Allenby Bridge crossing, right? There are just 3 crossing that exist between Israel and its neighboring nations. One is the Rafah crossing, which has already been asked. Then there are 2 more crossings which are yet to be asked. One is the Sheikh Hussein crossing between Israel and Jordan, Allenby Bridge between West Bank and Jordan. Try to remember this. Okay. And when it comes to this border between Israel and Lebanon, this line is what is called as the blue line. Okay. So you can pay attention to that as well. And when it comes to water bodies, you can see Dead Sea, right? So Dead Sea, it's actually located between Jordan and between Israel. So I think that's also something that you can remember. And there's a gulf here. Okay, this is called as the Gulf of Aqaba. So you can try to remember this as well. Gulf of Aqaba is here, and you have Dead Sea, which is here, right? So apart from that, even the terror groups can also become an area of being asked as a question, right? UPSC can ask, where is Hamas located? Hamas is located in Gaza. And where are Hezbollah located? Right? Hezbollah, they operate out of Lebanon. Okay. So the areas, the regions out of which these terror organizations are operative can also be asked as a question. So you can remember that as well. And UPSC can also ask questions like important places within Gaza, because it's places like Gaza City and Khan Yunis, right, which were bombed, which where a lot of fights used to happen, right. It's urban areas, and in the urban areas conflicts, skirmishes used to happen between the Israeli army, IDF, and these Hamas outfits, right. So from the perspective of Israel, just knowing blue line as a border between Lebanon and Israel is important. Knowing the different countries out of which these terror outfits operate is also important. Knowing the different crossings are important, and knowing the town called as Khan Yunis, from which at which a lot of attacks were carried out, is also important, right. All right, now coming to India's neighborhood, where you have civil war going on in Myanmar, right. So many times we hear about a huge refugee outflow from Myanmar into Bangladesh, right. We have the Muslim refugees who were called as the Rohingyas. So the Rohingyas, who were Muslim refugees from Bangladesh, from Myanmar, right, from the south, you can say, as a southwestern state of Myanmar. So Myanmar has around 7 different provinces, right. One of the provinces called as the Rakhine. It's another word for Arakan. Arakan is what is called today as Rakhine. And then you have Chin state, you have Kachin state, Shan, Kaya, Kain, Mon, right. There are just different provinces. Even if you don't remember all the provinces, it's still fine. Just understand this Rakhine state, which is to the southwest, right, it is actually bordering Bangladesh. This part is Bangladesh, right. So this Rakhine state borders Bangladesh, whereas the Chin state, this borders both Bangladesh as well as India, right, because it is even in the Chin state as well, you have a lot of rebel outfits who are not okay with the military having taken control of Myanmar. I am sure you all know that Myanmar is under the control of military. It's called as the military junta, right. Similar to Pakistan army, the army of Myanmar actually runs the entire country. It administers the country, it runs public sector undertakings, very similar to Pakistan army, right. In India we cannot even think of such things, but in Myanmar that's what is happening. So democracy is only existing namesake, all right. So but the real power is in the hands of the Myanmar army, all right. So that's why a lot of people who are not okay with democracy not being given effect in Myanmar, a lot of the Myanmar ethnic minority groups, right, the biggest majority ethnic group is what is called as the Burmar. The Burmars are the biggest majority ethnic group, and that's why the name of this country is also called as Burma. So apart from that, we have so many other minority groups, and all these minority groups have their own army factions, and all these armed forces, army factions, are all fighting against the military junta. And today the military junta is at a serious disadvantage, right. It only controls the capital Naypyidaw. Apart from that, all other parts of Myanmar is under the control of rebel factions, rebel army, right. So that's why UPSC can ask a variety of questions based out of this Myanmar issue, right. It can simply ask among the different regions given, and as a match the following question, Kachin can be matched with Ethiopia, and you may be asked whether it's rightly matched or not, right. You should know Kachin is actually a state, a province, which is actually rebel controlled and which is in Myanmar, right. So Kachin state actually has border with both India as well as with China, right. Rakhine state has border only with Bangladesh. Chin state has border with both India as well as Bangladesh, right. And Kain has border with Thailand, right. So this can be asked as a question. Karen is another group of people. They are from this Kain province, right. Karen, it's the same. The Karen people, just like how the Rohingya Muslims, they run away to Bangladesh because they are persecuted, they are hunted and killed by the military junta. Similarly, the Karen people, they actually run to refugee camps in Thailand. Alright, so just get exposed to all of this. Understand, Kachin is a state in northern part of Myanmar, which borders both India as well as China. Chin state borders Bangladesh, India. Rakhine state borders only Bangladesh. Okay, even if you don't remember the bordering provinces with Thailand and all of that, that's still fine, but at least with India border, you should know which all states, which all provinces of Myanmar borders India. That extent you should be clear about it. And when it comes to Myanmar, you should also know that the longest river that runs through Myanmar is river Irrawaddy. Right? River Irrawaddy is the longest river that runs through Myanmar. And where does it drain? Does it drain into Gulf of Thailand here, or does it drain into Bay of Bengal? The answer is this particular area where river Irrawaddy actually drains. This is called as the Andaman Sea, right? So it's also a part of Bay of Bengal. So Andaman Sea is where river Irrawaddy comes and drains, and where it drains, where it meets the sea, is where the city of Rangoon lies, Yangon. Right, it actually lies, which is the second largest city in Myanmar after Naypyidaw. Naypyidaw is the capital of Myanmar. All right, so just understand, river Irrawaddy is the longest. It comes and drains into the Andaman Sea. All right, and in addition to that, because of the earthquake that had recently occurred in Myanmar, a lot of destruction has happened. You should actually understand, Myanmar lies in the place in there is a fault line. Right, it's called as the Sagaing fault line. Right, so Sagaing fault line lies where the Indian plate and the Sunda plate actually meet. Right, so this fault line lies here. It lies from Andaman, it goes on, runs to the north until the Himalayan belt, where the Himalayas take a bend, right? So since it lies throughout the length of the country, when the plates move because of tectonic movements, that is what makes Myanmar very susceptible to earthquakes. All right, so this is also something that that you should remember. Where is Sagaing fault line located? It is actually located in Myanmar. Right, so that's an important fact. River Irrawaddy being the longest river of Myanmar, draining into Andaman Sea is another, and different Chin state, Kachin state, Rakhine state. Just try to remember them at least, if not others. All right. So now we move on to the next theme, which is basically the different countries which are in news because of Donald Trump and his policies. Right. So Trump, after becoming the president of US, had been making very bold statements. So he had been advocating for once again taking over the control of Panama into the hands of US. Now he wants to rename Gulf of Mexico into Gulf of America, and he's then full of talks about acquiring or conquering Greenland, making it as a part of America. Right. So that's why it's important that we look into those countries which are news because of Donald Trump. Right. So let's start our attention from Panama. Okay, so Panama is one among the Central American countries. So you have the North American continent, South American continent, and the narrow strip of land that connects North and South American continent, that is the Central American area. Right, in the Central American area, you have countries like Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama. These are all the different countries. So as you can see here on the map, the entire Panama, through its length of the country, you have mountainous regions. Right, so that's why human settlement is more or less possible only along the coastline. It's on the coast where you have human settlements possible. Right, and what you have to also notice here is between Colombia and Panama, connecting Colombia and Panama, is a narrow gap between these mountains, which is called as the Darien Gap. Right, it's a very treacherous route. It's very dangerous to be traveling on through this Darien Gap. And both the countries, both Panama and Colombia, they have ignored the development of this bordering area. Right, as a result of which most of the movement happens on foot. Right, so all the Colombians or Venezuelans who are trying to run away from their country in some search of better livelihood to USA, they take the risky journey through this Darien Gap. Right, so this is important, Darien Gap as a connecting point between Panama and Colombia. That's important. And what you need to know here is Gulf of Panama. Right, so Gulf of Panama is located in the southern part of Panama. So basically it is opening into the Pacific Ocean, right? So in the heat of the moment, when you write your prelims examination, these facts can be slightly tricky. It can be confusing. You may think Gulf of Panama, right? So Panama should be somewhere in the north. Okay, so Gulf of Panama, you may associate it with Atlantic Ocean, which is not the case, right? So Gulf of Panama is to the south of Panama. All right. So this is the only aspect that you have to remember about Panama. But while thinking about Panama, I was able to think about other ways of how questions can possibly be framed among the Central American countries. You need to actually understand which is the largest country. You need to understand which is the most populous country, right? So among the Central American countries, Nicaragua is the largest country in Central America, whereas when it comes to population, Guatemala is the most populous country in Central America. All right, at least these two facts I think are sufficient enough. Okay, so Nicaragua being the largest country, Guatemala being the most populous country in Central America. Just have a look at the map of Central America, right? So this Nicaragua, you see, it slightly looks bigger than the rest. This is the largest of the country, and Guatemala seems to be the most populous, which has the highest population, right? So I think with these aspects, you don't have to be worried about anything else about Central America. Panama is in news, so know about Darien Gap, know about the Gulf of Panama. All right, and among the Central American countries, know which is the most populous, which is the largest in terms of its size. That much is sufficient. All right. And also, since Panama is in news, and since US wants to revise the treaty, as a result of which US had handed over the control of Panama Canal into the hands of Panama people, right? It was as a result of treaty which is called as the Torrijos-Carter Treaty. Jimmy Carter was a former president of USA. So Torrijos should be a man from Panama, maybe some political leader or maybe the president of Panama, whoever it is. So it was a Torrijos-Carter Treaty which was signed in 1977, which allowed Panama to take over the control of Panama Canal in 1999. The reason is because the entire Panama Canal was constructed with the help of American expertise, with the help of American funding, right? So that happened during the time of FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was also the wartime president of America. So it was in the 40s when the Panama Canal was constructed, right? So a journey which used to earlier take almost 50-60 days around South America was then reduced to just a 10-hour journey, right? So that was a high point of American diplomacy, where it was able to construct a canal and have ownership over it in a foreign territory. All right, so that was bitterly resented by the people of Panama, and finally during the presidency of Jimmy Carter in 1977, the treaty was actually signed. So if at all UPSC asks, the question can only be about this Torrijos-Carter treaties, right, which allowed Panama to regain control of Panama Canal from 1999 onwards. All right, these are the only ways of how UPSC can actually ask a question surrounding Panama. All right, now America, Donald Trump wants to rename Gulf of Mexico into Gulf of America. So let's also try to understand where is Gulf of Mexico, or also called as the Gulf of America. Where is it even located, right? You should just understand two rivers of America drain into this Gulf of Mexico. One is River Mississippi, which is the longest river in America. The other one would be River Rio de Grande, right? So these are the two rivers which actually drain. One is River Mississippi, which coming slightly northward. River Rio de Grande is slightly to the south, Mississippi is even to the northward, right? So both these rivers would come and they would drain into this Gulf of Mexico, right? So try to understand this particular geography of this region, right? So you have Cuba here. Cuba is a set of islands, and then you have Haiti, you have Dominican Republic, right? These are all different islands that we have here. All right, so you should understand this this part of America is what is called as, this province is Florida, right? So you have the Strait of Florida, which separates Gulf of Mexico from Atlantic Ocean, right? So Strait of Florida separates Gulf of Mexico from Atlantic Ocean, and whereas you have the Yucatan Channel, which actually connects Gulf of Mexico with the Caribbean Sea. Alright, so understand the Caribbean Sea is what lies closer to South America. Okay, so it's here, South America. South America is here, so that's where you have the Caribbean Sea. Okay, so Panama is all located in the coast of Caribbean Sea. So Panama has nothing to do with Gulf of Mexico, right? So what are the littoral states around the Gulf of Mexico? It's just Mexico as well as USA, nothing else. Okay, but these are two important water bodies that you should remember. One is called Strait of Florida, which is the opening between Gulf of Mexico and Atlantic Ocean. The other one is what is called as the Yucatan Channel, which connects the Gulf of Mexico with Caribbean Sea. Okay, so that's all. This is what you need to know about Gulf of Mexico, since it is in news. All right, and then the other territory, other place that's in news is Greenland. Greenland is actually a part of the Kingdom of Denmark, right? So Trump has been very much concerned about Greenland, and he wants to make Greenland as a part of America. Greenland is not considered to be a part of Europe, it's considered to be a part of the North American continent. Be clear about that, right? Though it's actually a territory of Denmark, Greenland in a geographical sense actually is more a part of North American plate, right? So Greenland is a part of North America. All right, and moreover, the Chinese have been making a lot of investments in Greenland in the recent years, so that's also another reason why Trump would want to have direct control over Greenland. Okay, so what's important about Greenland? It's an island, and maybe you can also remember the group of indigenous people who live in Greenland. They are called as the Inuits. Inuits are none but Eskimos. It's the same Inuits who not only live in Greenland, they live in Canada, and they also live in Russia as well. The Eskimos who live in Russia, and who live in Canada, and who live in Greenland, they are the ones who are called as Inuits, right? This can be asked as a question. Okay, they are ethnically minority groups in all these countries. They speak their own language. Okay, so this is something that has a potential of being asked as a question. Inuits refer to, okay, indigenous people living in Canada, indigenous people living in Greece. So all tricky options can be given by UPSC. All right, so understand Arctic Circle is the most important latitude that actually passes through Greenland. All right, so apart from that, there isn't anything much to remember. And also understand, even though Greenland it's a tundra region, most parts of it is tundra region, also understand there are so many rivers that flow through Greenland. So do not be under the assumption that there are no rivers in Greenland. No, when the ice melts, the landform is such that there are major river systems which are there in Greenland as well. All right, so I think with this we'll conclude this session. So what is important as a takeaway from this session is, yeah, these are all areas which are prominent in news. I'm sure every video that you happen to watch on YouTube regarding the places in news will all be discussing something or the other about all these regions, right? So nobody would be missing out on prominent places in news. Everybody knows this is what are prominently in news. But what are the other ways? What are all the different dimensions in which you put a particular place to use, right? As how I have shown you, even though it could be simply about Panama, my mind starts thinking about the largest country in Central America, the most populous country in Central America. So that is one way of learning, right? Even though the news was only about Guyana, now I start thinking whether Guyana falls under the Amazon's river course or not, right? When I see the map of Egypt and Sudan, I'm able to see a perfect straight line. That makes me think what could possibly be this latitude, right? So this is the way how you have to utilize your learning, utilize your preparation for map sites when it comes to this prelims examination. It's not only confined to memorizing 3 or 4 aspects about that particular site alone, but try to ask yourself the question if any more learning, anything more can be learnt out of this particular topic. Alright. So if at all you have more need for any other discussions on more other places, maybe you can drop it in the comment section. Right? If at all there is any need, if you have some other queries about some other regions which have missed my attention in this session, maybe you can drop that, and if we have time for another session on map places, we'll try to cover that as well. Alright. So thank you.